Hello and welcome to Guides.Global and to the Guides.Global discussion about buying property in Bulgaria. My name's John Howell, I'm the Editorial Director of Guides.Global, and with me today I have Lyubov Jones. Lyubov is a lawyer working in Bulgaria, practicing in Bulgaria and the UK, and also, probably more importantly, she is the author of our Guide to Buying Property in Bulgaria. Lyubov, welcome and thank you for coming. So the basics. I suppose the first basic question I have to ask you is a foreigner allowed to buy a property in Bulgaria? You know, there are some countries where they say, no, we'll only sell to our own people. So can a foreigner buy in Bulgaria?
Yes, all restrictions for foreigners are now elapsed, and they can freely go in to buy any property, with one little exception, is that if you go in to buy an agricultural land, you still need to set up a Bulgarian limited company.
But
say
anything else, company, whether it's an apartment, a house, a piece of land in a city,
yes,
anyone can buy, and any foreigner. You don't have to be a European national, it could be an American or it could be a Chinese person.
Correct. It doesn't matter what is your nationality, no restrictions.
Well, that's nice and simple.
Mm.
Do you need permission to buy in Bulgaria? Okay, you're legally allowed to do it, but do you have to get permissions before you can do it? Or do you just go and find a property and buy it?
You go find the property and buy it.
So simple.
Simple, yeah.
I'm liking this. Okay, so let's take a look at the basic system of buying property. And the basic system, of course, like in every country, is geared to allowing people to buy property safely so that they aren't cheated, they get good legal title, good ownership of the land, and so on. Really, Bulgaria is part of the Napoleonic law family of countries.
Yes, correct. That's it.
Okay, can you just tell us very briefly, like in, as it were, one paragraph, what is the process of buying a property in Bulgaria? Start at the beginning and just go through it, but just very quickly, because we'll then look at it in more detail in a minute.
Okay. First of all, you need to choose the location where you want to buy. And of course choose the property, and then to request all the documents relating to this purchase. Then you need to find a suitable for you lawyer who will work for you and check everything before you commit yourself to a purchase.
Yes. Okay, and then eventually you get to the point where all of those inquiries have been made and the lawyer says, yes, it's safe to go ahead and buy this property, and you then sign a contract and then sign legal title.
Yes, very often you buy the property in stages. If it's a rather expensive property, you may conclude a preliminary contract first of all, which contract has to have all the conditions that later will be implemented in the final title deed, the proper final deed for the property.
We'll look at that in more detail later. Let's just take a look at this point at some of the key people who are involved in this process. So I suppose most people will start off by having contact with an estate agent.
Yes, I think it's the first person that you contact. Yeah.
Are estate agents in Bulgaria licensed? Do they have to have a professional qualification?
Yes, they are licensed.
And I think it's fair to say that particularly during the boom years of 2006, 7, 8, there were lots of people who were selling property in Bulgaria who were not licensed.
Yes, but this time is so over and...
that's gone.
Yes, gone.
So basically, if you're dealing with an agent in Bulgaria, he's now likely to have the proper license, and you should make sure he does, because it's much safer to deal with a licensed agent.
Yes, the general rule that the buyer should be aware applying for Bulgaria in full force. You should check everything and you start with the estate agent.
Yes. And there's not your rule, but there's a Guides.Global hint about dealing with an estate agent, and that is to say that the only safe thing you can assume is that every time their lips move, they're lying. Now, that doesn't mean to say they are. Most of them will be honest and decent and truthful, but until you can establish that what they have said to you is true, you need to assume that it's not, because otherwise you can get into all sorts of deep water.
Yes, correct.
How would you find out whether your estate agent has got a license? Is it displayed on his premises, or?
Yes, it's quite. You can ask any agent, and he will provide you.
Okay.
It's like
Well, that's the estate agent. Then perhaps the next person we need to look at is the lawyer. What do you call a lawyer in Bulgaria?
it's a advocat.
Advocate. So it's very much in the Western model.
Yes.
Okay. And again, lawyers must be qualified.
Yes, of course.
It takes you a long time.
You should ask the lawyer to present you his lawyer card from the bar where he is registered. This is first things, it's his identity document. Secondly, you can check him through the website in the bar. There is a list of the lawyers registered. You can check all the background of this lawyer, whether he been punished, whether he is still in practice, all the details.
And we'll come back into the question of choosing a lawyer later, but the most important thing is that the lawyer is an independent lawyer who you know is working for you and not, for example, representing the seller as well, or indeed sometimes looking after his own interests at the expense of both of you. Then we will very often have a bank or a mortgage company concerned, but mortgages in Bulgaria are a bit tricky, aren't they, at the moment?
At the moment, yeah, it wasn't like that in previous years, but recently the banks become very aware of what they give to people, what kind of mortgage.
Yes. Okay. You will have dealings, or your lawyer on your behalf probably will have dealings with the local municipality, the local town council. And what's that called in Bulgaria? What's the Bulgarian for the municipality?
Община.
Okay. And so there are various things that need to be checked out there.
Yes.
What about notaries? Will you become involved with a notary if you're buying a property in Bulgaria?
The notary is a person who will sign your notary deed and will complete the transaction from the seller to the buyer.
So it's an essential step when you're buying a property in Bulgaria that the whole thing is finalized by going in front of the notary who witnesses that the transaction has taken place and certifies that this has actually happened.
Correct. And he also will record your property at the land registry generally.
And that's his responsibility to do
but
that.
You need to be aware that the notary public in Bulgaria will not check your property. It's not his responsibility.
He's just there to witness that Mr. A and Mr. B have come in front of him and said that Mr. A has sold this property to Mr. B. Yes, done.
Correct.
I certify it.
Correct.
He's not the man who makes the checks.
No.
Okay, well, that's the main people who are involved. Let's just turn our attention briefly to the question of legal title. Now, when we talk about legal title, what we mean is the evidence that you own the property, yes?
Yes, correct.
Are there different types of legal title in Bulgaria, or is it a question that you either own the property or you don't?
Yes, it's either own or not own. We haven't got that middle title like in other countries.
Yes. Yeah. So that's, again, nice and simple.
Yes, it's very simple. The only checks involved in the land registry, whether this property belongs to you as the seller, whether the whole property belongs to you as well.
Yes, because part of the property could belong, for example, to the seller's brother.
Yes, correct. Yes. It could be the division of the property, it could be co-ownership, it could be inheritance.
That's the next thing I was going to ask you about, because sometimes you will, for example, want to buy the property with your wife or your husband. And what's the effect of that, legally speaking?
Any property that been bought during marriage in Bulgaria belongs to both spouses.
So if, as is very often the case, a couple want to buy a ski home in Bulgaria for their personal family use, the default position is that that's going to go in both of their names in equal shares, and if they want to change that, there is special work that needs to be done.
Yes, if you can put one of the names in the notary deed. It wouldn't change the legal situation for both of them.
Because their rights go beyond the notary.
Correct.
So even if you just put it in the husband's name, the wife will have a 50% claim on the property unless the special steps are taken.
Absolutely right, yeah.
And of course, there are lots and lots of ways they could choose to own the property in Bulgaria, aren't there? I mean, they could, for example, choose to buy through a Bulgarian company or in just one person's name or the other spouse's name, maybe put it in the name of the children. And there could be good reasons for doing all of those things, which could save them a lot of money.
It could save them a lot of money maybe in your own country, but you need to be very careful when you use this scheme in Bulgaria, because we have different system of inheritance, which slightly different from the system in the UK or other countries. Therefore, you need to take a full legal advice before you want to put the property into the company name or in your children's name.
Because you need to understand what the effect of these things is going to be in Bulgaria, and also what the effect is going to be in your own country.
Correct.
And it's the sort of interaction between these two legal systems that produces the opportunities and also the dangers.
Yes.
So you really need a lawyer who is familiar with what happens in both countries.
That's why we were talking at the beginning, always use your independent lawyer, because it's essential in Bulgaria to have a lawyer.
Yes. Very important tip, I think, and one that can save people a lot of money, but more importantly, it can save them an awful lot of difficulty and aggravation later on, which no one really wants.
Correct. A lot of people coming back to us very often for because of the mistakes made in past, ignoring good advice of using lawyer just maybe from the financial reasons to save some money, but the fee that you pay to a lawyer never wasted.
So you say as a lawyer.
I'm saying it and sign for this.
Another thing I want to talk about briefly, because it's important for lots of people buying in Bulgaria, is what you might call the community of owners. If you buy an apartment in a complex, that complex may have a swimming pool, it may have a gym, it may have common access ways, common parking and so on. So how does that work in Bulgaria? How do you deal with that?
The title deed, however, when you buy a property in such condominium, is not exactly the same like you say in the UK. Therefore, again, there are some specifics when you buy the property in such resort.
And so if you buy an apartment in a resort like that, you become the owner of your apartment, and you also become the owner of a share of all of the common areas?
If that's what you state in the title deed, everything needs to be checked and signed in the title deed, because you may be live with the impression that you are buying your individual apartment plus a share of the common areas, swimming pool, spa, or whatever facilities in the complex, but it couldn't be the legal situation could be different from
it could be, for example, that you only end up owning your apartment and you have a contractual obligation to pay for the maintenance of those other areas which actually belong to somebody else.
Correct.
So this is an important thing which the buyer needs to think about and make sure that his lawyer explains clearly.
Yes, that's why especially when you buy the property in such resorts, you always need to take good advice and to not be afraid. Ask your lawyer as many questions as you want regarding to make it clear for you.
And of course it goes without saying that if you're buying in a resort like that, you are going to have to pay part of the expenses of maintaining the pool, maintaining the gardens, maintaining the security and so on.
Yes, correct.
So for the person buying a property, the important thing is just to check what the arrangements are in the place where you're going to be buying, and also get some indication of what the likely annual fees are going to be, because they vary enormously, partly depending on the facilities.
Yes, the amount of annual fees is a very tricky point, because sometimes the management contract is not very clear what you actually need to pay. And this is the matter of your lawyer to make it clear for you and to clarify in advance before you commit yourself with the management company what exactly they meant by saying this.
Because with all these things, it's clarity is what you're looking for, understanding what your obligations are and having them properly recorded on paper.
Correct. There are a lot of hidden tricks.
Okay. Let's move on to foreign exchange and exchange control. are there any restrictions on your ability to bring money into Bulgaria? And are there restrictions on your ability to take money out of Bulgaria once you've sold your property?
The general rules apply for Bulgaria, like for all other European countries, like
so money laundering.
Yes, money laundering regulations. Everything is exactly the same. Therefore, it's nothing different. When you bring the money in, when you take the money out, if it from the sale proceeds of your property, you can freely to
including any profit that you might have made.
Yes, you take the obligations according to Bulgarian tax law.
Yes.
If you're obliged to pay any tax,
yes.
Then you will pay it, and then the balance could be freely transferred to.
And you started to mention cash there.
Mm-hmm.
Do not take a suitcase full of cash because someone will confiscate it.
Yes, it's you need to check that allowance. It's only 10,000.
10,000 euros. And frankly, I think you're foolish if you take 10,000 euros in cash because it's more trouble than it's worth. Okay, well, that's the end of that section about the basics behind buying property in Bulgaria. If you've enjoyed this, please do follow us or like us. And whether you do that or not, we'll see you back shortly. Thank you. And thank you, Lyubov.